Wowza, good afternoon. I am delighted to report that I am most frequently the speaker that holds people from lunch. So I will try to make it as interesting as possible and fight through the hunger pains that you're feeling as we embark on this conversation. I am humbled to follow the indomitable Rip Rapson, who is a professional hero of mine and whose courageous vision and investments in Detroit actually have developed the professional I have become and really highlighted some of the sensibilities that I hope to share with you today. As Gordon mentioned, my name is Leslie Smith. I am the president of the EPIcenter, which is a startup movement in Memphis, Tennessee, really designed to catalyze an entrepreneurial movement and connect assets that heretofore have been disconnected and try and really encourage exponential outcomes from this body of work that was so important in the city of Detroit. So mine is a tale of two cities. When you look at that picture, you can see that we have not only a lovely landscape, but a skyline that is terribly similar. I'm happy to report we share more than a great river in common. We share an extraordinary love for music and food and arts and culture. We have a deep and historic relationship to sort of our racial struggles that have historically sort of confronted us in Detroit with the civil uprisings of 67 and 68, and of course in Memphis with the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., which haunts us today. So the similarities are interesting and complicated and a part of what really drives our work there. They also happen to be two cities that are blessed to benefit from high levels of philanthropic investment and high levels of poverty. And so that really causes those of us engaged in this work to think about unpacking the tension between those two very real facts. And I think you just heard Rip talk about some innovations in philanthropy that are helping us address that head on. What he won't say about the work they're doing in Kresge, or at Kresge in Detroit and other places, is it's terribly provocative and innovative. This is not sort of your grandfather's charitable giving. This is sort of bleeding edge, courageous, risk-taking philanthropy that has the potential to create great and sort of sustained change in our cities. And so while Memphis and Detroit share similar rates of poverty, which are unfathomably high, approaching 40%, and high unemployment that is 3 times national averages. They also share and embody a spirit of authenticity and grit and unwillingness to quit, which is what draws me, a native Detroiter, to allow myself to be exported to Memphis and hopefully share some of the things we learned during the course of the last 7 or 8 years in Detroit to Memphis and adapt them to some of her unique challenges, but also to some of her very similar challenges. The one thing that is so remarkable to me about Memphis is she, like Detroit, oftentimes has forgotten how extraordinary she is. And as an outsider, I can sort of call that to question for Memphis. As a Detroiter, I forgot too. So the fresh beginning and willingness to sort of look at the world differently has helped me see things that I don't think I would have seen in Detroit had I stayed. So what did I do in Detroit? Little compared to what Rip and Mac and others did, but I was deeply involved in the entrepreneurial landscape, recruited there really to focus on the expansion of the tech-based economy, which the work of which was being done from inside this innovation district. We have them across the world. I got to tour the one in Berkeley. I've toured Oakland. I've been blessed to visit places around the country that have these sort of similar gatherings or clustering of rich assets that come together to create, high-tech, high-growth opportunities. Our strategies aren't all that different from city to city. Our assets are mildly different. Our sort of sources of funds vary, of course. But the strategies are pretty much the same. How do we extract sort of value out of the research institutions that create high-tech, high-growth companies, attract and retain the appropriate amounts of talent to fuel those, and make sure we have sources of capital and programming that support the growth of those enterprises. I didn't know when I got to TechTown that I would end up spending the bulk of my time thinking about what to do with this. And that is, these innovation districts make up a very small percentage of not only the geographic parts of our city, but also the community residents to which they accrue benefit. And so early on in my work, found myself challenged to face the emerging question in Detroit about the notion of two Detroits, or two Detroits emerging, the neighborhoods of Detroit, which were sort of intractably entrenched in impoverished situations with high blight, high crime, low infrastructure, and these investments that were being made in the city center. Rip talked about that. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more. So, I hope you notice that instead of showing traditional Detroit ruin porn, we're showing you the more beautiful parts of our city, because there are many. And I'm not one here to try and exploit my hometown. It is a beautiful city, and I have no doubt she will fully revive. Early in my tenure at TechTown, I started interviewing hundreds of Detroiters, and repeatedly sort of heard the comment, "What about us? What about us? What about us?" And I said, well, all of these resources sit in service to you. We've built them. This entire network, you know, is here for all Detroiters. But I had sort of come to terms with the fact that, in spite of the fact we had built it, I was not building a baseball stadium, and the notion of having built it would cause them to come. I actually had to make it truly and functionally accessible. So once we got past the point of realizing that folks didn't even actually know that many of these resources existed, we had to think about how to physically, intellectually, and spiritually connect them to those resources. And so we had a strategy that if we put our resources and expertise in a backpack and found a community organization that was willing to invite us in, that perhaps we could use some of the high-tech, high-growth strategies that were at work in the city center and apply those to hyper-local economies in our city's neighborhoods. So I found a willing partner who would invite me in. We had no money, we had no approval, but we both had a very similar dream to do something that was provocative and hopefully potentially impactful, and we began. And we began with a couple of sort of fundamental beliefs. A, that we had to be invited in, and we were. B, we had to honor the tradition and spirit of the work that had been done for decades, because in spite of the fact that we think we have great ideas about how to help you solve your most sort of challenging problems, we haven't been here, and we need to honor the work that's been done. And B, we build a vision together that helps get us to the place where we collectively want to be. We thought that a vibrant hyperlocal economy would help lift up the neighborhoods. So, as with every good love story, there comes a moment when you realize that you only knew half of what you thought you knew. And we had our aha moment. The aha moment was that in Detroit, where we had sort of fundamentally developed silos as the result of, being the automotive capital of the world, the services that were being sort of provided in our neighborhoods were also siloed. You have economic developers and community developers and people that are focused on safety and education. And we came to realize that there was no way in hell we were going to create a hyperlocal economy if the neighborhoods in which we were trying to do that work were actually safe and stable and lit and accessible. And so our original theory about the development of sort of vibrant economies in local communities was pivoting to the realization that we had to address a whole series of other issues. And I'm happy to say that we did some adjustments. We began creating tables in our first neighborhood where we brought all of these disparate pieces together. We would invite people that were focused on safety. We would invite the city in. We would invite the faith-based community, the community gardeners, all of the folks that were working sort of in separate spaces to create amazing communities and try to organize our thoughts around how we were going to do that. And it really started to work. The most important moment I had while working on this portfolio of opportunities in Detroit was when someone in our first community, which is known as Brightmoor, one of our poorest communities, came to me and said, when folks from the city center arrived, we had hope. Now that doesn't get measured on the governor's dashboard, right? It's not necessarily 8 new jobs created and $1 million leveraged, but it's really important in a city who has suffered a lack of hope for a very, very long time. So we proved that there was some value in what we were thinking about. The federal government gave us some money to move into 3 more neighborhoods. As Rip mentioned, JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs came to town. They were interested in what sort of collectively was going on in our community and helped us move into an additional set of neighborhoods. And since that time, since the time I left, which is in March of this year, which we'll talk about in a moment, the work is now in 7 neighborhoods. The first year's results, which are shown here, suggested that there was work to be done, jobs to be retained, and people we could support. So we carried that strategy through a series of other neighborhoods. And we can say now that the gaps we identified in the ecosystem were thoughtfully filled by our partners in the city center. And now there are teams of organizations that are moving through our neighborhoods to ensure that the creative class and the entrepreneurs and our high school kids are receiving the type of support they need to be successful in our communities. So, the first question I always get asked is, why Memphis? Why would you leave Detroit? It's the most amazing story in the entire country, and it is one of the most amazing stories in the entire country. Why would you stop all of that really important work and move to Memphis? And the simple answer is, I think I was getting too comfortable and to continue to grow as a professional in this work and make sure that the focus of everything we do is about the creation of just and inclusive economies and not getting caught in anything that is short of extraordinary. I needed to get out of my Detroit mindset and be informed by different perspectives. And Memphis allows me that opportunity. There are very many extraordinary similarities, but there are also a whole host of differences that shake me every day and help me think about how this work can be successful. The first of which, for any of you who are Midwesterners, or particularly the Detroiters in the room, was adjusting how our direct sort of Detroit demeanor would be received in a Southern community. So this Detroit girl had to figure out how to communicate in a considerably less direct and very respectful way so as not to offend the people I really so deeply want to work with. And that's just one of my learnings. Like Detroit, Memphis has an innovation district. And unlike Detroit, when I first arrived to do this work has been underway for the last 15 years. Gordon mentioned Memphis Bioworks. They were the first organization in Memphis really sort of focused on the development of entrepreneurial ecosystems and the retooling of the life sciences industry and connecting the research and the professionals and the resources together to build that community back up to its full capacity. And so while this entrepreneurial movement and connecting all of these resources is a newer idea, the notion that Memphis should be entrepreneurial and innovative is not. So I'm sort of really blessed to be catching an important wave. You see the data points here about all of the things that are going on in the district. Like Detroit, it comprises less than 5% of the overall sort of footprint, while containing the majority of the employment opportunities within the city. So we get another opportunity to think about how we adapt and adopt strategies that have worked in Detroit, which Rip mentioned we not so shamefully stole from a variety of other cities that were doing really great things. So I think there's no harm in stealing what works in those places and bringing it to Memphis, because this is not a Memphis versus Detroit problem. This is not Memphis versus Baltimore. This is an American city challenge. We have a growing divide in terms of social and economic equity and justice. And while not taking time to debate the sort of merits of or importance of that from a personal or political perspective, economically, it just makes sense to have just and inclusive economies. They are demonstrated to grow faster. The outcomes in terms of health and quality of life and a whole series of things, reduction in crime, attainment of educational success, are all greater in just and inclusive economies. So we are obliged to develop those. We've been there doing this work now about a year. The things we have to talk about are the companies we've served, the dollars we've invested, and the things we've done. But the things to me that are sort of most important to report is when I arrived in Memphis, there was already an entire body of work at play in our communities. The neighborhoods, though still sort of facing similar problems to those neighborhoods in Detroit, there are strong-seated organizations that have been working on entrepreneurship and economic development, and there are seated CDFIs and micro-lending organizations that are trying to bring capital to our neighborhoods. So both of the bodies of work that we sort of recognized in Detroit are underway, and with some additional investment, we think we can really start to lift the city from where she is today into a vibrant and expanding economy, which is good not only for Memphis, but the state of Tennessee, the Delta region, and America. What I love about rooms like this, particularly as I get ready to let you go have lunch, is that we're here to sort of dare each other to think about things differently. We have water that has been really sort of bottled in an extraordinary, new, and innovative way. We've talked about a whole series of things about smart cities and thoughtful, innovative practice. And I hope that we walk away from this unwilling to sort of sit in the status quo, that certain things happen and there's nothing we can do about it, or, particular segments of our population are not served by this body of work, and actually move with intentionality to no longer accept sort of past paradigms and expect of ourselves an intentionality around inclusion and justice and creativity that allows us to create vibrant, high-tech, high-growth companies and vibrant community-based companies. At the same time, we're solving all of the problems that we face collectively, creatively, courageously, and with a passion that forces us through the challenges when they occur and the grace to pause and celebrate when it's appropriate. So I thank you for having me here. I am amazed to be speaking to such an extraordinary group of people. I look forward to working with all of you over the course of the coming decade to change the face of cities globally. My email address, which I will shout out for you because I know there won't be much time for questions after this, and I have to catch a plane back to Memphis, which unfortunately takes a bunch of hours, is Leslie@epimemphis.com, epimemphis.com. I hope you will share your thoughts and reactions and advice and challenges over the course of the coming weeks, and enjoy the balance of the conference, including the beer, which I am so sad to miss.
We'll get you some.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Leslie.